The morning mist hung over the castle like a soft veil, curling around towers and turrets and brushing the cobbled streets with silver. In the quiet of the courtyard, Elara moved like a shadow, her steps barely audible on the wet stones. Her dark hair, usually braided tightly to keep it out of her face, swung loosely today, catching droplets of fog. She kept her head low, as always, because the castle was full of eyes that loved to judge and ridicule. The nobles whispered behind her back, their laughter like knives slicing through the crisp morning air. "Look at her again," one girl snickered. "She's so quiet. I wonder if she even breathes." Another boy mimicked her soft voice in a cruel tone, and a small group of them giggled, shoving one another to get a better look. Elara ignored them. That was what she had learned to do over the years. Ignoring the world was easier than fighting it. Her refuge was always the library, a place where voices were few, and stories whispered from ancient tomes were kinder than people. But today, something in the air felt different, a tension that even the stones seemed to hum with. The castle gates opened with a great groan, and a ripple of excitement swept through the courtyard. Nobles and servants alike paused, holding their breath. A carriage rolled in, polished black with silver trim, and the horses snorted, their nostrils steaming in the cold. From the carriage stepped Alaric, the alpha heir the kingdom whispered about in awe and fear. Tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes that seemed to pierce through shadows, he carried the kind of presence that made even grown men bow instinctively. Elara felt her chest tighten. She had heard stories of Alaric since she was a child. He was said to be unmatched in strength and skill, and also unyielding in judgment. He did not tolerate weakness or dishonesty. But there was something more. A rumor that he chose his consort not for beauty, but for the fire in their soul. The bullies, of course, were ecstatic. They gathered closer, nudging one another, whispering which noble girls would surely win his favor. Elara shrank further back, wishing she could melt into the mist. Her solitude was shattered, however, when one of the boys, a tall youth with golden hair, tripped over her sleeve. "Watch where you're going, Shadow Witch," he sneered, grabbing her arm roughly. The others laughed, circling around her. "Do you even know what day it is? The Alpha comes today. And you?" Elara's hands clenched, a warmth rising from her chest. She had learned to stay silent, to bend like reeds in the wind, but something in her flared that morning. Not fear, not sorrow, something like fire. The whispers of the castle spirits she often spoke to seemed to stir in response, invisible threads of light brushing her skin. "Leave me alone," she whispered softly, not loud enough to command attention, but firm enough to make her intent clear. The boy laughed again and shoved her. This time, something happened. The small, hidden power she had always kept secret, the one she only let out when no one was watching, ignited. A sudden gust of wind whipped around her, lifting her hair, scattering papers from the nearby bench, and sending a shiver down the spines of those who dared touch her. The boy fell backward, staggering, his friends frozen in shock. From the shadows of the castle walls, Alaric watched. He had been inspecting the courtyard when the commotion drew his attention, but even before seeing it, he sensed it. A pulse of power, subtle yet unmistakable. When he finally looked, he saw a girl small and quiet, standing in a whirlwind of her own making, her dark eyes wide and alive, unafraid despite the danger surrounding her. Elara didn't notice him at first. She only felt the aftermath of her own strength, the wind still whispering against her skin, the air tingling with a strange energy. The other nobles quickly recovered, muttering and retreating, but their laughter was gone. What was that?" one of the boys stammered, his bravado shattered. Elara shook her head, as if trying to clear her own confusion. I don't know," she admitted softly, her voice barely more than a breath. Alaric stepped forward then, his long boots silent on the stone. He didn't speak at first. He merely observed her, eyes narrowing, as if seeing more than just the event that had occurred. He saw the girl who had been mocked her whole life, who had endured cruelty quietly, who had chosen silence over conflict. And he saw something else, something rare in the world: resilience. The courtyard, once full of gossip and mockery, fell silent under his gaze. Alaric stopped a few steps away, tall and commanding, yet there was a curiosity in his expression, a flicker of something more intimate than judgment. "You are unlike the others," he said, his voice low, carrying easily in the still air. "You have fire, and yet you hide it. Why?" Elara's heart raced. She had never been addressed by anyone of importance, let alone the Alpha Heir himself. Her voice trembled, but she answered, because somehow she could not remain silent. Because no one would understand. Alaric studied her, his dark eyes searching hers. Perhaps they have not yet tried. There was no malice in his tone, only a weight that made her feel seen for the first time in her life. Seen, not as weak, not as quiet, not as insignificant, but as someone whose worth was measured by the courage she did not flaunt. The moment stretched. A fragile thread of connection, in a world where she had always been invisible. Then, the sounds of the castle returned, the clatter of servants, the whispers of the nobles, the distant cry of a hawk, but the spell of that encounter lingered. "You," Alaric began again, his gaze unwavering. "You will be at the trial tonight." Elara blinked. "Trial?" "The tests," he said simply. "All who wish to stand by my side must prove their strength, their spirit, and their heart. You will come. Do not refuse." The courtyard seemed to shrink around her. The noble children who had laughed moments before now stared, mouths agape, whispers dying on their tongues. Elara felt a tremor of fear and excitement swirl in her chest. A trial. A chance to be seen not for what others thought of her, but for what she truly was. Still, doubt gnawed at her. She was small, quiet, unnoticed. What could she, a girl who spent more time in books than in battles, possibly prove? Alaric stepped closer, the wind stirring again, as if acknowledging him, as if bowing to the presence of power. "Do not mistake this for charity," he said. "You will be tested beyond your comfort. But I sense you are capable, stronger than you believe. Remember that." He turned then, moving toward the castle's great doors, leaving her with the weight of his words and the strange electricity that lingered in the courtyard. Elara remained still, staring after him, the mist curling at her feet like a soft applause. Her life had been one of quiet suffering, of hiding and enduring, of shadows and whispers. But something had shifted. The Alpha Heir had seen her, and for the first time, she felt the stirrings of possibility. As the nobles recovered and muttered among themselves, one of the girls sneered, "He probably just likes a little novelty. She won't last in the trial." Elara's lips curved into the faintest smile. For the first time, she did not feel small. Not when the fire inside her had spoken. Not when someone powerful had noticed. Not when the possibility of change had brushed her life like the morning mist. That night, when the castle doors were closed and the moon hung high above, Elara prepared herself. She did not know what the trial would entail, only that it would demand courage, cunning, and heart. And as she closed her eyes in the quiet of her small chamber, she whispered to the shadows she trusted, "Show me who I can become." Outside, the castle walls seemed to shiver, and a cold wind swept through the courtyard, carrying with it a promise that the quiet girl would no longer be invisible. And somewhere in the distance, Alaric's gaze lingered, unwavering and intent, as if he already knew that her choice to rise would change everything. The trial awaited, and with it, The quiet girl's life would never be the same again. The moon hung high over the castle, spilling silver light across the courtyard as Alara approached the trial chamber. Her heart pounded, a rhythm she had rarely noticed in her quiet life. The halls were empty, save for the echoes of her soft footsteps. She clutched a small satchel of essentials books, a journal, and a dagger her father had once given her, though she knew the dagger was more for courage than combat. The trial chamber was carved into the oldest tower of the castle, with walls lined in ancient runes that glimmered faintly in the moonlight. At the far end, Alaric stood, tall and commanding as ever. His presence seemed to bend the shadows around him, and when he turned his gaze toward her, it felt like the air itself held its breath. "You are here," he said, his voice calm but powerful. "You have a choice. You may leave and return to your quiet life, unnoticed as you were, or you may face the trials and discover who you truly are." Alara swallowed. Her first instinct was to flee, to retreat to the safety of silence. But something stronger nudged at her chest, a spark she had rarely felt. "I will face them," she said, her voice trembling, but determined. Alaric nodded once, approvingly, then stepped forward. The first trial began in a hall lined with mirrors, their surfaces fogged and warped. "Your first test," Alaric said, "is to confront yourself." Alara hesitated. Mirrors had always unsettled her. She had spent years hiding from reflections, fearing she would see the girl everyone mocked. The girl who could never speak up. The girl who had been invisible in every room. She stepped forward. The mirrors shimmered, and suddenly she was no longer looking at herself, but at images of her life, the whispered taunts of nobles, the sneers, the accidents she had blamed on herself. Anger rose in her chest, fierce and bright. The girl in the mirror reached out, crying silently, and Alara felt tears sting her own eyes. "I am more than this," she whispered, almost to herself. And then she touched the glass. The mirror rippled, and the reflection changed. It showed a strong girl, standing tall, her eyes steady and defiant. A voice echoed in the hall, Alaric's, calm and commanding. "Strength is not the absence of fear. It is the choice to stand, despite it." Alara nodded, taking a deep breath. The mirrors shattered silently, leaving shards that glimmered in the moonlight. And the path forward opened. Her heart raced, but the fear that had always weighed on her seemed lighter somehow, replaced by a quiet certainty. The second trial took her to the castle's outer forest, where mist curled like serpents around twisted trees. Alaric followed silently at a distance, his presence a steady reminder that she was being watched, judged, tested. The task was simple in words but dangerous in reality. Retrieve a single flower that bloomed only under the moonlight, guarded by unseen spirits. Alara stepped cautiously into the forest. Each breath she took seemed amplified, the cold mist biting her cheeks. The spirits whispered, voices like leaves rustling, trying to confuse her, to make her doubt her steps. She faltered once, thinking she had gone the wrong way, but then she remembered Alaric's words. Strength was in choice, not absence of fear. "Focus," she whispered, closing her eyes and listening not to the spirits, but to herself. A path emerged in her mind, glowing faintly in the darkness. She followed it until she found the flower. A delicate bloom, silver as the moon, shimmering as though it held the night sky in its petals. As she reached for it, a shadow leapt from the mist, a spirit in the form of a massive wolf, eyes like embers. Its growl rumbled through the air. Alara froze, fear clenching her chest. She remembered the dagger in her satchel, the courage it represented, and the words she had whispered to herself in the mirror trial. "I am not afraid of you," she said, softly but firmly. The wolf blinked, tilting its head, then vanished into the mist, as if satisfied with her courage. The flower remained, glowing gently in her hands. Alaric stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "Courage is not the absence of fear," he said, echoing the lesson of the mirrors. It is acting despite it. You have passed the second trial. The third trial was the hardest. They returned to the castle, to a chamber filled with puzzles and riddles that twisted reality. Each step was a test of intellect, judgment, and intuition. Elara worked methodically, using the quiet patience she had honed over years of solitude. She solved riddles that had stumped the nobles, discovered hidden levers and doors, and unlocked paths that required both wit and heart. Alaric watched closely. For the first time, Elara noticed a subtle shift in his demeanor. He was no longer just an observer. He was intrigued. His usual command softened when she succeeded, and there was a faint smile that seemed almost human. "You are unlike any who have walked these halls," he said. Elara felt a warmth in her chest. She had always believed that no one truly saw her. And now, here was someone who did not, for her looks, not for her noble lineage, not for the favor of her peers, but for her mind, her courage, her spirit. The trials ended, but the lessons lingered. She realized that the quiet girl she had been the one who hid in corners, who endured humiliation in silence, was changing. Each step of the trial revealed a version of herself she had not allowed to exist. Brave, clever, strong, and capable. Alaric led her to the balcony that overlooked the courtyard. The moonlight painted both of them in silver and shadow. "You have done well," he said. "Few would have succeeded as you have." Elara shook her head. I couldn't have done it without, I don't know, something inside me that finally listened to me. Alaric nodded, as if understanding more than she had spoken. "The world will try to shape you, quiet girl. It will try to break you. But strength like yours, it cannot be ignored. Remember this moment, and remember what you have learned." The wind tugged at her hair and the folds of her simple dress. She shivered, but not from cold. The trials had exhausted her, yes, but also awakened something she had never known. A sense of belonging, of recognition, of purpose. "You have changed," Alaric said quietly, "and so has the world around you. But be warned, those who envied you before will now resent you even more. The court does not forgive strength. It fears it." Elara nodded. Fear had been her companion all her life, but she now understood that courage could be louder than fear, even when she remained quiet in voice. Her power, both hidden and revealed, was hers to command. As she turned to leave, the faintest whisper of movement caught her attention. One of the nobles, a girl who had tormented her for years, lingered at the edge of the balcony, face pale, eyes wide. This isn't over," she muttered under her breath. Elara ignored her. The trial had taught her that not everyone's opinions mattered. Only her choices, her courage, her heart, they mattered. She walked toward Alaric, feeling the moonlight warm her face and the weight of possibility settle on her shoulders. Alaric's gaze lingered on her longer than necessary, almost as if measuring her, weighing her, recognizing her. "You have done well, Elara," he said softly. "But the hardest trials are yet to come." Elara's heart skipped. She had faced mirrors, shadows, and riddles. But Alaric's words hinted at deeper challenges, trials that would demand more than courage or intellect. They would demand heart, spirit, and perhaps even trust. A sense of anticipation tingled through her, mingled with fear. She had stepped into this trial unsure, timid, unseen. She would leave it different, stronger, braver, no longer the quiet girl everyone dismissed. But somewhere deep in the shadows of the castle, she could sense the eyes of those who envied her, of those who wished to see her fail. And she knew that the path ahead would test her in ways the moonlit forest and magical chambers had not yet revealed. As she turned back to Alaric, she found him already looking at her, expression unreadable, yet softening. "Rest," he said. For tomorrow, the trial will continue. And tomorrow, you will see that courage alone is not enough. You must also learn to wield your heart. Elara nodded, a shiver of anticipation and fear coursing through her. She did not know what the next trial would hold, only that she would face it. And this time, she would not face it alone. The wind rose again, wrapping around them, carrying a whisper of promise and peril. The quiet girl, who had endured ridicule and isolation her whole life, felt for the first time that she belonged to something greater than herself. A story unfolding in moonlight and shadow, where courage, heart, and the choices of one small girl could change the fate of more than just her own life. And somewhere in the castle's distant towers, the alpha heir watched her. His thoughts unreadable, his intentions a secret, but his gaze said one thing loud and clear. She had caught his attention, and nothing would ever be the same. The dawn broke over the castle like molten gold spilling across the towers. Elara stood by the window of her chamber, watching the courtyard awaken below. The trials of the previous night had changed her, but she knew the hardest part was yet to come. The quiet girl who had once scuttled through corridors unseen now felt the weight of attention on her shoulders. Even in the early morning, whispers followed her steps. The nobles who had mocked her before no longer laughed openly. Instead, they whispered behind hands, glances sharp with envy and suspicion. Some looked at her with curiosity, others with fear. Elara felt it all, but she held her head high. She had learned that strength was quiet, and even small gestures could speak louder than words. A soft knock at her door pulled her from her thoughts. It was Alaric. His cloak brushed the floor as he stepped into the chamber, his expression calm but unreadable. "You performed well in the trials," he said, his deep voice resonating against the stone walls. "But the true test is not in the challenges you face alone. It is in the trials of the court, the trials of others, and the trials that demand heart as much as courage." Elara nodded, her pulse quickening. She had begun to understand the magnitude of what she had stepped into. This was not merely a game or test of skill, it was a world of politics, power, and perception, where a single misstep could undo everything she had earned. Alaric studied her for a long moment, then added, "You are not alone. I will be beside you. But the court does not forgive weakness. They will test you, envy you, and seek to see you fail. You must be ready." The words were a warning, but also a promise. Elara felt a strange warmth, a reassurance she had rarely known. With Alaric's guidance, perhaps she could navigate the treacherous waters that had always threatened to drown her. The first challenge of the day came at breakfast, in the grand hall of the castle. Nobles gathered in silks and finery, the aroma of fresh bread and roasted meats filling the air. The murmurs were immediate soft at first, then louder as eyes turned toward Elara. She felt their stares, their silent accusations, and the small seed of anxiety that had always lingered in her chest. A young noblewoman, once her tormentor, stood up. "Do you think you belong here?" she asked, her tone sharp with disdain. "The trials may have amused the alpha, but no one else believes a quiet girl can rise above her place." Elara met her gaze steadily. Her heart raced, but she remembered the lessons of the mirrors and the forest. Fear was not her master. "I am not here to please you," she said softly, yet with authority. "I am here to prove who I am." The hall fell silent. Even Alaric's expression betrayed a faint flicker of approval. The nobles exchanged uneasy glances, realizing for the first time that the quiet girl was no longer easily dismissed. The next test was less visible, but far more dangerous. The court's envy and resentment manifested in subtle schemes. A poisoned goblet meant for her breakfast was quietly removed by a vigilant servant. A letter meant to incite panic was intercepted. Elara began to understand that her trials were not only magical, but political. Every step required awareness. Every word could carry weight. Alaric led her to the castle's inner sanctum that afternoon, a hall lined with ancient tapestries depicting battles and alliances of the past. "Here," he said, "you will face the test of perception. You must navigate deception, identify threats, and make decisions that could alter lives. Not all trials will be obvious, and not all dangers are visible." The hall transformed before her eyes. Shadows shifted unnaturally. Whispers floated through the air like mist, and illusions of allies and enemies appeared at every corner. Elara's mind raced, trying to determine what was real and what was not. She recalled the flower from the forest, the mirrors, and the courage she had summoned in the face of fear. Trusting herself was the only way forward. A figure stepped from the shadows, a familiar face, one of the nobles who had tormented her most cruelly. In the illusion, they reached for a dagger. Elara reacted instinctively, sidestepping and placing a barrier between them, her movements fluid and precise. The figure vanished, replaced by a vision of herself, calm and composed. The illusion had tested not her skill in combat, but her judgment and restraint. Alaric's voice echoed through the hall, steady and commanding. "Strength without wisdom is dangerous. Wisdom without courage is meaningless. You must learn to balance both. Lock. Wisdom. Lock." Elara exhaled slowly. The lesson was clear. Power was not only in action, but in restraint and discernment. She had learned to act with courage, now she must act with clarity. Later, they walked through the castle gardens, the scent of night-blooming flowers heavy in the cool evening air. Alaric spoke softly, almost as if sharing a secret. "You are changing," he said. "Not just in the trials, but in spirit. The court sees you differently now. Some fear you, some resent you, and some, they hope to sway you. Be cautious. Not everyone who smiles is an ally." Elara listened, feeling both a thrill and a chill. The world was far more complex than she had ever imagined. It was a dance of shadows and light, of power and influence, and she had only just begun to step onto the stage. That night, as the moon rose high and the castle fell into quiet slumber, a shadow crept into her chamber. It was subtle at first, a whisper of movement in the corner of her eye. Elara's heart jumped, but she remembered the lessons of the trials. Fear was not the enemy. Clarity was. She rose and approached the shadow. To her surprise, it was not a spirit or an intruder, but the young noblewoman who had mocked her at breakfast. Her face was pale, eyes wide with fear and uncertainty. I wanted to speak," she said, voice trembling. "I did not expect this. I mean, you are different. Stronger than anyone here." Elara studied her carefully. This was no trap. The girl seemed genuinely shaken, not scheming. "Change is difficult to see," Elara said softly. "It is harder to live through than to witness. Be mindful of your words and actions. Strength reveals itself in time." The noblewoman nodded, bowed slightly, and left. Elara felt a flicker of understanding. Some who had opposed her might yet become allies, if she showed patience and wisdom. The trials were not just about facing danger, they were about learning the currents of the world around her. As she settled by the window to rest, Elara thought of the Alpha. His presence had been a constant in the trials, both a guide and a test. She realized that her feelings toward him were growing more complex. Respect and admiration mingled with curiosity and a strange, unspoken connection. She did not fully understand it, but she sensed that Alaric saw her in ways no one else ever had. Suddenly, a loud cry echoed through the castle. Alaric was already moving toward the source, and Elara followed instinctively. In the courtyard, a group of nobles had gathered around a figure. A young boy. A page who had fainted. Whispers spread quickly. "It is the work of the girl? She has magic." Alara pushed through the crowd, her heart pounding. She had not caused harm, yet the suspicion in their eyes was real. Alaric arrived then, stepping between her and the murmuring nobles. His eyes blazed with authority. "She has done nothing," he said firmly. "Those who spread lies and fear will answer to me. This ends now." The nobles backed away, fear and respect mingling in their expressions. Alara felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. She was no longer invisible, no longer powerless. The quiet girl had begun to step fully into her own strength, and the court could no longer ignore her. Later, Alaric and Alara stood in the tower, overlooking the moonlit courtyard. "The court is dangerous," he said. "They will test you in ways beyond trials and illusions. Trust is scarce, but courage will serve you well. And remember, some challenges cannot be faced alone." Alara nodded, feeling the weight and the thrill of the words. She had endured ridicule, solitude, and fear, yet she had survived and thrived in ways she had never imagined. She looked at Alaric, at the steady presence beside her, and felt a spark of something deeper than respect, a connection forged in trials and mutual recognition. But even in the quiet of the tower, a shadow lingered. In the deepest corners of the castle, where light barely reached, the whispers of envy and resentment stirred. The court had not forgiven her. The nobles had not abandoned their schemes. And beyond that, Alara knew that the greatest trials, those that would test her heart, her spirit, and the bond she was forming with Alaric, were still to come. As she turned away from the balcony, moonlight brushing her face, Alara understood one thing with clarity. She was no longer just the quiet girl. She was a force in the making, and the story of who she would become was only beginning. The first rays of dawn painted the castle towers in soft gold and rose. The quiet girl who had endured ridicule, whispers, and fear now stood taller than ever. Alara had faced the trials of mirrors, shadows, illusions, and whispers, and she had survived. Yet she knew the greatest challenge awaited not in the halls, not in the forest, but in the heart of the court itself, where envy and ambition simmered unseen. Alaric stood beside her, his presence a constant reminder of both challenge and support. His dark eyes scanned the courtyard below, noting the murmurs of nobles whose jealousy had not diminished, only grown sharper after witnessing Alara's growth. "They will not rest," he said quietly. "But neither will we." Alara nodded, feeling the strange thrill of purpose that had grown in her chest over the past days. She had learned to trust her courage, her mind, and now, even her instincts. But more than that, she realized she had begun to trust Alaric. Not in the way the court might have expected a servant to a master, but as a partner, equal in spirit, in determination, and in quiet strength. The first confrontation came during the midday assembly in the Grand Hall. Nobles crowded around, their eyes flicking toward her like predators. One of the older, proudest nobles stood and spoke sharply, his voice carrying through the hall. "Do you believe a quiet girl, who has spent her life in shadows, can truly stand alongside the Alpha? This is not a game of whispers and illusions. The court demands strength, and strength is not given lightly." 234. Alara's gaze did not waver. The voice that had been quiet for so long now held a calm firmness. "Strength is not measured by lineage or laughter," she said softly, her voice clear and steady. "It is measured by courage, by choice, and by the will to act when the world expects you to remain silent." A hush fell over the hall. Even Alaric, usually so unflinching, allowed a faint smile to cross his face. The nobles exchanged uneasy glances, realizing that she was no longer the girl they had mocked. The quiet girl had become something more. A presence, a force, a question that none could answer lightly. The second challenge was subtler, yet far more dangerous. As the nobles whispered and watched, Elara had to navigate the hidden currents of the court. Whispers, manipulations, and veiled threats. A false letter, meant to incite panic about her abilities, appeared on her desk. She read it calmly, recognizing the hand of envy and malice. But instead of anger or fear, she allowed clarity to guide her. She copied the message, sent a corrected version to Alaric, and allowed the court to see that deceit could not sway her. "Power without wisdom is empty," Alaric said later, walking beside her through the moonlit garden. "You have learned courage and action. Now you learn discernment. There are those who fear what they cannot control. Some will bend, some will break, and some may yet surprise you." Elara listened, understanding the subtle truth of his words. The quiet girl, who had once feared shadows and whispers, had grown into a presence the court could no longer ignore. Yet the lessons were not merely about surviving, they were about becoming, transforming fear and doubt into strength and clarity. Night fell over the castle, soft and silver. Elara stood on the balcony of the tallest tower, feeling the wind curl around her. Alaric joined her quietly, standing beside her with an unspoken sense of solidarity. "The final trial is at hand," he said. "The final trial. Not one of shadows or illusions, but of heart. You must choose to remain silent and safe, or to step fully into who you are, with all the world watching, and with me beside you." Elara turned to him, her heart racing not with fear, but with anticipation. I am ready," she said. "Whatever it takes, I will face it." Alaric's expression softened, but remained serious. "Then, we face it together." The trial began in the grand hall, transformed for the occasion. Candles flickered, casting dancing shadows along the walls. Nobles and courtiers filled the room, all eyes on her. A hush fell as Alaric raised his hand, signaling the start. Elara took a deep breath, feeling the lessons of the past days coalesce within her. She remembered the mirrors, the forest, the riddles, and the whispers. She remembered fear and courage, envy and restraint, silence and voice. And she remembered the spark that had begun in the courtyard, the one Alaric had noticed. A spark that now burned into a quiet, steady flame. One by one, the nobles challenged her with questions, riddles, and tests of judgment. She answered each with clarity and calm, drawing on the knowledge, insight, and intuition she had honed. When illusions appeared, she saw them for what they were, moving past distraction and fear. When deceit was whispered, she recognized truth and let it guide her. The room seemed to hold its breath. The court had expected the quiet girl to falter, to stumble, to be revealed as weak. Instead, she moved with confidence, intelligence, and quiet authority. Finally, Alaric stepped forward. "You have faced every trial," he said, his voice carrying through the hall. "Not only with courage and skill, but with heart and wisdom. You have chosen not to be silent, not to hide, not to yield to fear or envy. You have chosen to rise." The hall erupted in murmurs. Some nobles whispered in awe, some in envy, but no one could deny what they had seen. Elara's heart beat fast, but not with fear. She had faced the world and found her own strength reflected back. Alaric extended his hand toward her, and the quiet girl, now fully aware of who she had become, took it without hesitation. "You are more than I imagined," he said softly. "Not because you are perfect, but because you are brave enough to be yourself." Elara felt warmth spread through her chest. For the first time, she did not feel small, unseen, or dismissed. She felt seen, acknowledged, and respected not by titles or appearances, but by recognition of who she truly was. The final moment of the trial was both intimate and public. Alaric raised his hand, addressing the court. This quiet girl, Elara, has proven herself in ways none of you expected. She has courage, wisdom, and heart. She stands not only by my side, but as my equal. Let it be known, she is chosen, and her place is not behind shadows, but in the light of her own making. The hall fell silent, a collective realization settling among the nobles. The quiet girl had been chosen, not for beauty, not for status, but for strength of spirit. And in that choice, she had claimed not only her place but the recognition she had always longed for. Later, in the stillness of the tower, Elara and Alaric stood together, looking out over the courtyard. "The trials are over," Alaric said, "but life is never without challenge. You have grown strong, but the world will continue to test you. Do not fear it. You have proven you can meet it head on." Elara nodded, feeling the weight of his words. "I have learned," she said softly, "that courage is not just in facing danger, but in trusting yourself, trusting others, and standing even when the world expects you to fall." Alaric smiled, a rare softness touching his features. "And you have learned well. You are no longer the quiet girl. You are a force to be reckoned with, a presence that cannot be ignored." For the first time in her life, Elara allowed herself to feel proud, not because others recognized her, but because she recognized herself. She had faced ridicule, fear, envy, and uncertainty, and emerged stronger, braver, and unbroken. As they turned away from the balcony, the castle seemed transformed in her eyes. No longer a place of whispers and shadows, it was a world of possibility, of challenge, and of recognition. She had stepped fully into her own strength, and with Alaric beside her, she felt prepared for whatever trials lay ahead. And though the court would continue to test her, though envy and ambition would still linger in corners, she no longer feared them. She had faced the hardest trials already, the ones that demanded courage, heart, and the will to rise above fear. Elara and Alaric walked side by side through the castle halls, a quiet but undeniable presence. Nobles whispered, courtiers glanced, but no one dared challenge them openly. The quiet girl had become a force, and the alpha heir had recognized it. The wind swept through the towers, carrying a promise of future challenges, future triumphs, and future moments where courage and heart would be tested again. But for now, the quiet girl had been chosen, had proven herself, and had claimed a place in the light. As they stood together in the moonlit courtyard, Alaric placed a hand gently on hers. "You are ready," he said, "not only for the trials of the court, but for everything that lies ahead, and I will stand with you." Elara smiled, feeling the warmth of trust, recognition, and partnership. The quiet girl was no longer invisible, no longer powerless, and no longer alone. She had been seen, chosen, and acknowledged, and in that moment, she knew that the story of who she was and who she would become was just beginning.